Have you ever thought about musical skill as being like, I don't know, like unearthing some kind of hidden treasure? We usually think about it as all the practice and repetition and stuff, but what if it's also about finding something precious within the sounds themselves? That's kind of what we're diving into today, this whole idea of what they're calling gemologists of sound with the Triquetrae music students. And to get there, well, we're going to have to use our imaginations a bit. Picture this: an enchanted kingdom of music, a whole world where, like, nailing a musical phrase is like, I don't know, like digging up a super valuable gem or something. That's the kind of world we're exploring today.
Yeah, it's like all that dedication you put into getting your intonation perfect, like really laser focused on being rhythmically precise. Those become as valuable, literally, as a perfectly cut diamond or ruby or something. We're going to go deep into this enchanted kingdom using this really cool blog post called Gemologists of Sound by Chris Caton Greasley. It's from March 2025, and there's this image too, Gemologists of Sound, an introduction to the kingdom that goes with it. So, mission objective for today is to figure out how this whole gemology thing actually connects to music for these students and why they think these musical gems are so important.
Gemologists of sound. Now, that's a cool title, I got to admit. But what does it actually mean in this context? When I hear
Yeah.
gemologist, I'm picturing someone in a lab coat with like a magnifying glass and tweezers hunched over a diamond using all these high-tech gadgets, like what is it, spectroscopy or something, to tell if it's real and how much it's worth. It's all about the money, right?
You pretty much nailed the traditional picture. In the grown-up world, being a gemologist is totally about figuring out the money value of precious stones. It's all about using those fancy scientific methods, breaking down the stone structure and, what it looks like to figure out how good it is, how much they can sell it for on the market. But what's wild is how these Triquetrae music students are flipping that idea. They're gemologists too, but they're using their analytical skills, those sharp observation powers, to examine music instead of rocks. It's like they're dissecting melodies, figuring out how all the harmonies click together.
But there's a really big difference, though, right? It's not just about looking at something that's already there. These TQ students are actually earning their gems, like through their hard work and improvement. It's all about how much effort they put into mastering those musical fundamentals, those things like playing in tune, keeping the rhythm steady, understanding how chords work together, even capturing the right feeling or style of the piece. And those gems they get, it's like a direct reward for all that effort they put in. And hold on, these gems, they're not just some symbolic thing, right? The blog post makes it sound like they're actually used like money in this enchanted kingdom.
Absolutely. Inside this musical world, those gems they're earning have real value, like actual currency. There's this thing called the Jamboree, kind of like a big annual fair. They can actually trade their gems for little trinkets and stuff, age appropriate, of course, like little rewards they can only get by being awesome at music. And get this, they can even use them at the TQ Trade Outlet Music Shop, they also call it the Music Corner, to get sweet discounts like 10, even 20% off on instruments and sheet music.
So we have all these young musicians basically leveling up in this crazy enchanted kingdom by becoming musical gem experts.
Okay, you got to tell me more about this place. What's the story behind it? How did it all begin?
Okay, so picture this. The enchanted kingdom of music has this super old, almost legendary history. It all starts way, way back with these beings called the modal masters. The blog post mentions something called the harmonic convergence, this huge event where music literally created color and rhythm in the world. Like imagine sounds raining down and boom, the first songs are born. That's the kind of power we're talking about here. And that's when the Musi dragons, led by this dragon called Rudra, appeared.
Musy dragons. Wait, hold up. So these aren't like those fire-breathing, treasure-hoarding dragons we usually think of,
You're
right?
not even close. They're way more interesting than that. They are literally, get this, the dragonification of the guardians of the sounds. It's right there in the blog. That's how important music was in this world, and still is, I guess.
Dragonification. That's awesome. So these Musa dragons were like the original protectors of musical harmony. Bingo. All those other guardian spirits, they faded away over time, but these Musi dragons, they were tough. They stuck around, representing the core essence of sound itself. For thousands of years, they guarded those pure tones, the building blocks of music. But then, dissonances started showing up. Sounds that, kind of clashed with their whole established order. That really shook things up, and they kind of went into hiding. For like 2,000 years, they retreated into the musical instruments humans were creating, their power, like on standby. Oh, and this is where it gets super cool. All those unused sounds, those dissonances they couldn't handle, they didn't just disappear. Over centuries, they compressed, forming crystals, crystals of sound. And these crystals, they weren't just any old crystals. They were colored gemstones, each one holding echoes of those lost voices, almost like musical fossils or something.
Whoa, these musical gems are way more than just pretty baubles. They're like little time capsules of a totally different era of music. Okay, so then the blog mentions these dark ages where sounds went silent. That sounds kind of ominous.
Yeah, it was this period where music lost its punch. The colors faded, the sounds were muted, not as vibrant. And then after the silence, a huge battle started. On one side, you had the Grand Maestro. Think of them as the ultimate spokesperson for music, the one who trained musicians in the old ways, acting on behalf of the dragons. There were different maestros over time, but they all defended those ancient sounds. On the other side, you had these representatives from the kingdoms of logic and order. They were all about these new major minor tonalities. And they saw sound not so much as a creative force, but more as a resource to, control and organize. It was a clash of styles, basically. Old school versus new school.
Sounds like a fight for the very soul of music.
Ugh.
How long did this musical showdown last?
A long time, like 500 years of musical battles and arguments. And in the end, the last Modal Grand Maestro, the last of their line, was defeated. All those musical gems, those crystallized lost voices, they got scattered everywhere throughout what they call the sound spiral. Some even ended up in instruments that were built for these new major and minor scales. The scales, by the way, that we're all so used to hearing today. And then this figure, the general major minor, took over and started this new era of music. They founded the Major Minor Music Academy to train everyone in this new system, and it's still around today.
That's a huge shift from this magical sound world to a system to major and minor scales, the basis of a ton of music we hear today.
Yeah.
But it sounds like things didn't stay that way, right? There's a hint of things coming back into balance.
Right. The latest general major minor, they realized that those old traditions and those, unique sounds had a lot of value. So they reached out to the Music Dragons. And get this, Rudra's power is making a comeback. There's this new agreement, a harmonic agreement, between the ancient ways, the newer system, and even us, humans. And this is where the TQ students come in. Their job, by practicing all these different musical skills, is to help restore that balance. So all these sounds, they can all exist together. It's a universal musical framework.
Wow, that's quite the story. The blog even says the landscape of this enchanted kingdom mirrors this whole musical world with stuff like musical rivers, harmonic mountains, even rhythmic forests. Okay, we're definitely doing more deep dives on those in the future.
Yeah.
And then you've got the main music dragons, Rudra, Sarun, and Verdun. They're not just protectors of the kingdom, they also run the Dragolian banks, and they oversee all the gem mining too. Plus, there's like active quests to find these scattered gems, right? Quests for both the young dragons and the student gemologists.
Yep. There's a ton of adventure packed into learning in this world. And the Enchanted Kingdom, it's not just a big empty space. They've got towns and villages scattered all over, each with its own unique musical vibe, you could say.
Let's visit some of those. First up, Stonewall and Blue Water.
Oh.
Way over on the far side of, get this, the Circle of Fifths Highway. Now that sounds like a place with some serious musical significance. Just a quick reminder for anyone who's not a music nerd, the Circle of Fifths is like a map showing how all the different musical keys relate to each other.
Exactly. It's like their musical address is super important. These towns, they're full of ancient secrets and, musical lore. And get this, the plants, the flowers, the trees, they all grow in colors that match the chords based on where they are on that musical highway. You can't even get around there without knowing your stuff, from the Circle of Fifths challenge and the Triangle Triad challenge, which are all about understanding chords. Oh, and apparently the highway used to be way bigger. It had 5 levels for the dragons to do these huge aerial displays of, sound movement. Now it's been simplified to just the major and minor sections.
Whoa, that's such a cool way to visualize how all those musical keys connect. Next stop is Redfield. It's described as a place for starting out, but also for getting sidetracked. They even warn about accidental issues in the fields around it. That doesn't sound so great.
Right. Redfield is supposed to be this peaceful, easy-to-navigate village where lots of musical journeys begin. But those fields around it, that's where things can go wrong. They're full of musical pitfalls, shortcuts that lead you astray, trying to rush ahead without really understanding things. Basically, tons of distractions that can mess up your musical progress. It all goes back to these researchers, Madsen and Geringer. They wrote about this back in 1981. They stressed how important it is to practice in a focused way and not get, pulled in different directions. It's like they're saying that taking the scenic route isn't always the best way to learn.
That's a lesson any student can use, whether you're learning music or anything else. Then there's Orange Shroom. It sounds kind of whimsical, but it also sounds like there's a catch.
Definitely. Orange Shroom is less of a town and more like a village with big dreams, lots of potential. The problem is the shrooms. They say if you hang out there too long, you risk getting stuck, like just daydreaming about being a musical superstar without actually doing the work. The blog says those shrooms can almost like steal your motivation by feeding that lack of action and all that time you're wasting. Well, that's time you could be practicing. It's like a metaphor for procrastination. This researcher, Klinger, wrote about this back in 2013, and he basically said that you got to get up and do the work. Wishing won't make it happen.
Especially in music, right? You got to put in the hours. Okay, next up is Yellow Bottom, and this place sounds crucial for understanding harmony.
Super crucial. Yellow Bottom is known for its yellow stones, but these aren't just any stones. They're like the key to understanding triads, which, for everyone listening, are basically the simplest chords, made up of 3 notes. And Yellow Bottom is the home of the Triangle Triad Challenge, this big test all about mastering that middle note of a triad. That's the note that determines the color of the chord, the mood it creates. That all comes from Dahl's research, published in 2025. It's like, if you want to get how chords work, you got to go to Yellow Bottom and figure out those yellow stones.
So it's like the birthplace of chords, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, on to Green Hill, and this is where we find the Major-Minor Music Academy. Sounds like we're back in familiar territory, like the heart of traditional music education.
Yep, you got it. Green Hill represents the major and minor tonalities, the system that forms the basis of so much Western music. It's a musical learning hub with a superstructured approach to harmony. And there's this cool thing, the Village Green, where they have 3 music trees, one's for major, one's for minor, and one's for modal sounds. They call it the new sonic soundscape, even though it's been around for a while.
I love how they've turned musical concepts into these, living, breathing things.
Yeah.
Okay, next up, we're climbing Blue Mountain, and this one has some seriously interesting inhabitants. Short, square people with a special understanding of musical architecture and a connection to the history of musical notation.
Right. Blue Mountain is wild. The people there, they're short and square, like literally. And it's not just their looks. They have this deep understanding of how music is structured, how it's built. They even say that their shape inspired Grand Maestro Guido to create the staff, those 5 lines we use to write music, and those square-shaped notes that came before the rounded ones we use now. All of that is based on Stainer's work from 1899 about the history of musical notation. It's like how we see and write music. It all started with these little square people.
That's so cool. Okay, now we're heading into Purple Deeps, the place to mine those purple gems,
Yeah.
but sounds like there's also some danger lurking around.
Yeah, Purple Deeps is built around the shadowy crevasse, and that's where they mine those purple gems. But there's a catch. They say these mysterious beings live in the shadows and they mess with the sounds. Like, they'll switch a note just slightly so it sounds almost right, but not quite. And that messes up the whole harmony, the way you hear the music, even how it makes you feel. It's like they're playing tricks on your ears. Temperately, back in 1997, he wrote about harmonic analysis and how even small changes can completely change how we experience music. It makes you realize how delicate music is and how even tiny mistakes can totally change things.
That's kind of scary, but also cool. It's like, be careful what you listen to. Even small changes can have a big impact.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, last stop on our village tour is Pink Cloud. And this one sounds super chill and inspiring, like surrounded by cherry trees, a place for sonic dreaming and creativity.
Yeah, Pink Cloud is the total opposite of Purple Deeps. Imagine beautiful blooming cherry trees everywhere and this peaceful vibe perfect for, sonic daydreaming. They say it's a place where human-made sounds and nature sounds blend together, and it sparks musical creativity. Crota and some other researchers, they wrote about this in 2023, how different sounds can mix together and affect our emotions. Pink Cloud is a reminder that inspiration can come from anywhere.
So each place has its own personality, its own musical concept. It's not just a random fantasy world. Okay, let's move on from the villages and talk about those gemologist zones, these specialized areas that are all about different parts of studying music. They seem to match up perfectly with how real-world gemologists work.
Totally. They took that gemology thing and ran with it. First, you've got the Explore Zone identification, where students break down how music is structured. They find the themes, the main musical ideas, the motifs, those little repeating patterns. They also figure out the harmony, like how the chords move. It's just like how a real gemologist figures out what makes each gemstone unique, what's inside it. Then there's the Achieve Zone, grading. This is all about assessing performances and compositions using a set of rules, kind of like judging a talent show. They're looking at technique, how expressive the performance is, and how well it fits a certain style, just like how a gemologist grades a diamond's cut and clarity.
Then you've got zones that dig even deeper, like looking at the value and bigger picture of these musical gems.
Right. The develop zone appraisal. This is where they write detailed reports about musical pieces, like super in-depth analysis. They even measure things like harmonic density, that's how many notes are happening at the same time, rhythmic complexity, and the shape of the melody. It's like measuring a gem's carat weight and all those details that affect its value. Then there's the grow zone research. This zone zooms out and looks at the history and culture of different musical traditions. They're exploring musical heritage from around the world, thinking about where different kinds of music came from and what they mean to different people.
So it's like they're studying the whole story of music, not just the technical stuff. And there are a couple more zones that focus on, like, how music is actually used and how it affects us emotionally.
You got it. The create zone. Jewelry. This zone is all about how we use music to, like, enhance our experiences. Think about film scores, video game soundtracks, all those ways music adds something special to what we're seeing or doing. They're looking at how we've used music in the past and how we might use it in the future. And then there's the build zone, color. This one focuses on the emotional side of music, how different sounds and harmonies make us feel. Students learn to create a whole palette of sonic colors, through their practice. And we can't forget about the fine zone, gem specialist. This is for those who want to find those rare, unique musical treasures. Maybe it's a lost composition, a new way of performing, or even some awesome fusion of different cultures' music.
It's like they've created this whole comprehensive system for understanding and appreciating music using this gemology analogy. And the blog post even throws in some fun places to visit within the kingdom.
Yeah, they really went all out with the imagination. Places like the Lair of the Octave Spiders, which, probably has something to do with musical octaves, right? And then there's Mermaid Lagoon. Maybe it's all flowing melodies and beautiful underwater sounds. And then, get this, the sound volcanoes. They say that's where the old dragons live and where you mine the oldest sounds. It all just adds this cool layer of mystery and wonder. And then there's more, like the Stave, which is the kingdom's bank, Bellflower Meadows for, like, collecting melodies, I guess, the Old Castle, where you find hidden musical scores, Amphitheater for electric instruments, and the Jamboree, that's their big trading event that happens every year.
It's like a music-themed amusement park. That sounds awesome.
Right.
And it sounds like those TQ students have been busy collecting those musical gems. The blog post mentions some pretty impressive achievements from 2024.
Oh yeah. In just 1 year, all the TQ students together, they earned a whopping 12,592 gems. That shows how much they're learning and growing. They even gave shout-out to 8 students: Thomas, Ava, Charlotte Rose, Ruthie, Alicia, Aubrey, Alicia, and Gracie. Those 8 alone, they collected 2,812 gems. That's commitment.
That's a treasure chest full of musical knowledge. I'm glad they included a glossary, too, for all of us who aren't fluent in music terminology. And there's even a quiz if you want to test your knowledge about the Enchanted Kingdom and this whole gemology thing. And teachers, listen up. The TQ Teacher Training section has essay questions, so you can really dive deep with your students and explore these ideas.
It's like they've built a whole curriculum around this, encouraging both students and teachers to really think about the deeper meaning behind music.
Well, this has been eye-opening. This whole deep dive into the gemologists of sound and the Enchanted Kingdom of music, it's amazing how they've taken this idea of gemology and used it to create a whole learning experience for these students. It's creative, it's engaging, and it makes you think about music in a new way.
It goes way deeper than just a simple comparison. They're really getting at those core concepts of identification, figuring out what music is made of, evaluation, how we judge skill and quality. Then there's value, thinking about what makes musical achievement meaningful. And even the historical and cultural context, like where did this music come from and what does it tell us about ourselves? It's all there, just like in the world of gemology.
It definitely changes how you view music, for sure.
Yeah.
It makes you look beyond just the notes on the page and think about those gems, those moments of brilliance, the stories behind the music, how it makes you feel, and its connection to culture and history.
And here's something to think about for all of you listening. Remember those lost voices trapped in those crystallized sound gems from the Enchanted Kingdom? What kind of hidden stories or echoes do you hear in the music you love? What makes those musical moments precious to you? What cultural whispers do you hear in the melodies? These are questions worth pondering long after our deep dive is over.